Hey everyone, welcome to Office Hours with Cloud Posse, your weekly dose of insider DevOps trends, AWS news, and Terraform insights, all sourced from our sweetops community, plus a live Q&A you can't find anywhere else. It's April 30th, 2025. I'm your host, Eric Osterman. Real quick, I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator focused on AWS infrastructure that helps teams move faster by leveraging our over 200 Terraform modules that have been battle tested and downloaded over 100 million times. So no matter where you or your team has been, banging your head on the wall against, banging your head against the wall with Terraform, just head over to cloudposse.com/meet, answer a few quick questions, and you can book a meeting with me directly. So how can you maximize today's session? First off, the format's very informal. You can engage as much as you'd like, ask questions, and if you're curious about any of our open source tools or modules, go for it. And for those on the recording, we host these calls live, so don't miss out. Join us by going to cloudposse.com/officehours. Again, cloudposse.com/officehours. Now, I do have one ask. If you find any portion of today's session valuable, you can go ahead and share it with your team. Just head over to youtube.com/cloudposse, where you'll find a recording of this session in a few hours. So with that said, let's jump into what news and announcements caught our attention this week. All right, first one, this is a biggie. So there was some confusion around this. I think it was a very hasty move due to everything riding on Terraform. You know, when the whole BSL license switch came out, the community quickly gathered around one project that eventually became called OpenTofu, which is this official, not an official fork, which is the community fork, if you will, of Terraform. So what quickly happened at that time was the Linux Foundation became a sponsor or backer of OpenTofu. And the intention was to get it into the CNCF, but that process was a lot more involved than anyone could have imagined. And there were a few roadblocks along the way. So this is an interesting part of actually to do a little pitch for our own site and documentation. This is one of those things that we document in our reference architecture. I think we say decide on Terraform version. So we talk about, this switch, the background, what happened, and actually we haven't updated this with the latest news as of today, but this helps kind of spin why this happened and why we're here today. So you might recall last year, HashiCorp sent a cease and desist accusing that they were copying BSL license code in new feature development for, I think, Terraform removed blocks or something, or import blocks in OpenTofu. Turns out they clearly did not. They were just following the exact interface, the programmatic patterns in the code base that anyone attempting to do the same thing with the MPL licensed version of Terraform would have arrived at that same outcome. So it was not wholesale copied from the BSL version of Terraform. But that whole thing threw the application into review again, and more things had to be considered. That's all blown over now. And the last big hurdle, which was something that I learned, I didn't understand this difference, so I thought I'd share, is that MPL license code is somewhere in between like an Apache 2 license and an AGPL license. That means it's more copy left than the permissive licenses like Apache 2 and MIT. And what does that mean? So a few things. So first, every project in the CNCF has to be Apache 2 licensed, not MPL. So that was going to be, at first glance, a blocker for this project to make its way into the CNCF, because the 1.57 version and earlier of Terraform were MPL licensed. The other kicker is that MPL is a file-based license, not a project-based license. So every individual file has that specific license. And the only way you can relicense a project, let's say from MPL to Apache 2, would have been to get all the original copyright holders to bless that. and that wasn't going to happen under the circumstances, let's face it. So what this had to go all the way up the ranks in the CNCF, where they voted recently to make an exception on this one case. I'm not sure if there have been other exceptions. I'd be really curious if anybody knows if there's been other license exceptions for projects in the CNCF. So there's a PDF of the notes. I believe that's this one here. Yeah. So here they talk about the resolution to make the exception. All right. So what does that mean? What that means, and this is that time of office hours where my screen goes blank. There we go. What this means for OpenTofu is now it's officially a sandbox project, which is like the lowest rung. But based on the level of community participation, the number of companies involved, the amount writing on this, I expect this is going to progress rapidly through the various stages of the CNCF. Anything else to add to this? Someone sent this, was asking if we had any customers using Cargo. I'll be honest, not really familiar with Cargo. To me, it was a package manager for Rust projects with a C. This is unfortunately named the same thing with a K. Obviously, every project with a K is Kubernetes. So this is another orchestration engine like that. But it's pretty nice. How it can solve the promotion of software between these different stages. If you're just trying to use, GitHub out of the box, you might be struggling. There's a lot that goes into that. We've spent a lot of time trying to get something visually like this into the GitHub UI across multiple stages and so forth. So if you have a complex release process on Kubernetes, strictly on Kubernetes, this might be something interesting. I believe this works in coordination with like Cargo. Anybody use Cargo with a K? All right, next one. So all hell broke loose this morning. Happened before I really checked in and was resolved rather quickly. I believe the issue was if you were not pinning the local provider, so using local resources in Terraform, a bad release this morning that had a V prefix on the version broke the local provider package basically, and you couldn't fetch the latest version of the local provider. So I believe if you had pinned this to a version, you wouldn't have had this problem to begin with, and all the more reason why make sure these versions are being pinned in some of your modules.
I mean, that guy right there that you just showed said that even version pinning didn't work.
Oh, really? Huh. All right. Well, that's pretty gnarly. So Jason Humphreys. I'm drawing a blank embarrassingly. Yeah, let me just take a quick look. Yeah, James Humphreys. He's part of Spacelift, but dedicated toward the OpenTofu project, was saying that this was a problem they encountered when they were designing the OpenTofu registry and ensured that that couldn't happen. But it looks like this was something that then the official registry hadn't accounted for. So yeah, pinning wouldn't have helped, I guess, then. Yeah, so thank you, everyone. We did finally cross the 1K threshold for Atmos. This is one of the cornerstones of the Cloud Posse solution. It's how we kind of help you describe your cloud infrastructure and the configuration that it encompasses. So this is how we organize infrastructure predominantly powered by Terraform. So our project just crossed 1,000 stars. Obviously a vanity metric, but it does feel good. Now, since I am desperate for material today, this one crossed my inbox or crossed my desk, and I thought it was interesting, not for the content so much as the movement. It's unlike if anybody's following GitHub's blog, I don't feel like this is the kind of announcement you see too often, or the blog post. But this is an official post on like when to use GitHub hosted runners versus self-hosted runners, with the sales pitch being, please stay on GitHub self-hosted runners. And obviously we love GitHub and we want the best for GitHub. And I like that there's one big player in this space and that we don't have 5, 10 GitHubs we have to deal with. So if there's a way they have to monetize the platform, great. That said, there are a lot of great alternatives that could be more economical than GitHub hosted runners.
Yeah, I know without all of our GitHub runner minutes, Microsoft could never afford to keep GitHub running.
Definitely, especially those from Cloud Posse, like we are holding them alive, right? Yeah, holding them up. Yeah. I would love to see some numbers though, like numbers, how many minutes per day, basically how many millennia per day are spent in GitHub runs on their cloud versus self-hosted.
The product managers definitely have that number. Whether or not they publish it ever, who knows?
Yeah.
Did they have a TLDR in that doc of like, if you need it, if you have 7 of these criteria, go with self-hosted. If you have 6 of whatever, go with, us. Or I'm genuinely curious as well, because I feel like I've always run self-hosted, but it's always like a huge starting point to get them going.
Yeah. If there was a TLDR, yeah, I guess that's what they have here at the bottom, but it's still too wordy to read.
Yeah.
But we'll share it in the I'll share right now, and then these always go out in the Zoom in the Slack channel afterwards. Oh, that was the wrong link. So, all right, next one was oh yeah, OpenTofu. So OpenTofu 1.10 is an alpha, which adds the state locking using the new S3 locking capabilities that are available. So Matt, I was wrong. I thought this was already released.
Yeah, I looked it up actually after our conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is coming out imminently, you could say, in 1.10. The nice thing is you don't need the DynamoDB tables anymore once this is available. But the other really nice thing is, I didn't realize this was coming out in 1.10, I just saw it this morning, was that the ability to download providers from OCI will be available. So you can use that as a mirror. Now, I'd love to see that with Terraform modules as well. Be much more performant, I believe. And super easy to self-host them.
Yeah. While you're in this section and on this topic, what I noticed was the the backends. They obviously ported all the backends from Terraform over to OpenTofu when they moved it, and there used to be Terraform Cloud backend.
Yeah.
But now it's just generic called the Cloud backend, and it makes reference to other clouds implementing their own backends that support only a subset of the Terraform Cloud backend. But I
Oh,
couldn't find any documentation on how to do that or anything. But if you actually find the provider documentation on that, they kind of allude to like you could build your own Terraform Cloud like backend. Yeah, I think that's it. See, if supported by your cloud backend, and
Mm.
then it says that they might only, like some clouds might only support a subset, but they don't actually like list like
Mhm.
how to implement a cloud backend that might, that might adhere to this. But this means if you were doing this, you could then, in theory, write your own backend state provider that adheres to whatever protocol they're using to do all of these things. And in that cloud config, you can point to a URL, right? So you can just give it one where it says host name. So app.example.com, like that can actually be like your own like your own backend in theory. So um
You know, it's
we're
so funny because I looked at this literally last week when we were discussing this, and I saw that it was gone, but I was strictly looking under this section, and this is a new section underneath backend, so not underneath, not in the same level. I believe cloud was previous, like if you go to HashiCorp, I believe it's listed under backends.
yeah,
As
yeah, yeah. So I was hoping, they talk about how like taco providers would use this to, basically implement their own backend state, but then I couldn't find a spec as to like what the HTTP verbs, presumably you need to, endpoints and verbs you need to support in order to be able to do that. So, and I didn't get so far as to going to read the source code yet, but I put it on my list at some point to look at it because it would be interesting, to be able to do that.
is this the kind of thing you can throw ChatGPT deep research at and tell it to come back to you with a example?
Possibly.
Interesting.
Yeah, I could try it. I have plenty of extra ones on my personal account left for this month.
So Matt just turned me on to the deep research, which has been out for a little while, but it's really cool. Unfortunately, when you're on ChatGPT for Teams, you're limited to 10 queries per month. But if you're an individual subscriber, you can get 200 or something. So,
My recommendation for deep research is you ask just like 4.0, like ask 4.0, give it context. Like, I want to ask deep research something about this topic. Keep asking me questions until you feel like you have enough context to supply deep research. That way you don't burn a deep research like credit and it spits back something like you don't really care about.
interesting. Okay. So, using some of its more advanced reasoning to get closer to the answer, but then filling in the blanks with deep research.
Yeah, being like, hey, I want to deep research on Kubernetes history, and then ask me questions about anything in particular. It's like, do you care about like the security of it? And be like, no, I don't care about that. I care more about, how it started or who developed it or things like that. And so it'll like then give you the prompt to supply to deep research. That way it's very tailored. The deep research that it gets back to you is very tailored to you. And that way you don't burn your 3 monthly credits or whatever, like with like information that you don't care about.
That reminds me of like the other ChatGPT announcement. Has anybody realized that ChatGPT was kissing your ass this past month or whatever it was? I don't know
And
how
they
long.
rolled it back.
Yeah, they just rolled it back. And I was wondering, like, ChatGPT is really just trying to get me to love it more all of a sudden. It was so annoying.
I actually added it um, to my personal like settings. I said, stop, don't be polite to me. Don't tell me I'm absolutely correct. Don't tell me like all these different things. I was like, just answer like the question that I asked without preamble, and then it stopped doing it before they rolled that back.
But even that it didn't seem to listen to it all the time, at least in my experience.
I don't know. I was pretty thorough about all the things that I told it not to say, and it was pretty like it was sticking pretty well to that. So yeah.
If anybody's not using ChatGPT daily and doesn't know what we're talking about, this here is a hilarious satire post ranking one here on Hacker News, because this is what ChatGPT sounded like. No matter the most outrageous thing you would say, it would basically respond with something along these lines. wow, what an excellent update. Now you're really getting to the core of the issue and doing only what a small minority are capable of doing. You know, it really stroked one's ego until you realized it was being stroked. So, all right. Any other announcements? Oh, yeah, there was one more very important announcement. A couple weeks ago, we launched officially commercial support for Cloud Posse. So if you're looking at getting different types of support only without a full freight engagement around our reference architectures, we now offer that. We offer priority support, flexible support, and essential support, which are priced depending on how you want our help and what your budget is. So priority support is awesome if you want direct Slack support from Cloud Posse with Slack Connect, same-day responses, just like chatting to a team member. Flexible support is more for like larger projects, things that can be scheduled. You don't need an answer right away. And then essential support is the easiest way to get support from us with prioritized responses and GitHub discussions, plus twice weekly customer workshops where you get to talk to us directly. So check that out. If that sounds interesting, just go to cloudposse.com/support. And with that, now we're ready for some announcement or some Q&A. Let's, unless there was any other announcement, let me check the chat.
I have just a very, very, very brief one that I saw that I thought was pretty interesting, that they're building a new availability zone for US East 1 in Maryland. So they're going like, whatever, another like 75 miles or 80 miles north of where the rest of US East 1 is currently. So, which not all of it's in one building. I think it's in like 6 or 7 different data centers or something like that. But now they're going even further north, I guess, to get away from, geographic outages that they may have. But I thought it's interesting that they continue to invest in US East 1 expansion.
That is interesting. And how many AZs is it up to now?
I think this one might be the 7th one.
Sounds about right.
I think that's right, but I don't quote me. That's off the top of my head.
But the other regions or zones rather, I thought they were definitely in multiple buildings. But I thought they were even more geographically separated, like maybe within miles of each other. But
yeah, I mean they're all in Virginia in different buildings, but like now this is going to Maryland basically. Yeah. So like it's I don't know, 75 or 80 miles north of the most northern Virginia one now. So it's like even further up.
Yeah. Outside the blast radius maybe of a nuke and
yeah, maybe, or that some kind of whatever threat assessment they have. Clearly Amazon spends lots of money on trying to figure this stuff out. So they didn't randomly just pick some location in Maryland and do it. It also could be like power grid availability or telecommunications availability or a number of other reasons that drive that. But I just thought it was interesting that they're building yet another availability zone.
yeah.
From reading the announcement, it also looks like they have 4 new regions that they're working on. It says New Zealand, Saudi Arabia, Taiwan, and then the European Sovereign Cloud. Haven't heard of that one yet.
That's really interesting. That makes sense to establish the EU sovereign cloud so that it's there's a lot of
GDPR kind of stuff.
GDPR, and also Europe is obviously threatening a lot of the things going on here in the US and wanting more independence from that. So something that we have less influence over. So makes sense. It would be curious how it separates from the other EU regions, for example. Because I thought the other EU regions from a GDPR perspective specifically were sufficient in data residency specific. So I think there's got to be another layer here of sovereignty, if you will. All right. So Q&A, well, I'll start off. 'Cause I had a question. One of the things that I think we do a lot of things right at Cloud Posse, but one of the things we haven't been doing is linting in our Terraform code. And I think it's something we should do to reduce the onus on our valuable contributors and collaborators who are helping review all the pull requests. But I realized after tasking, or not tasking, but Michael took it up on his own to kind of look into this a little bit, what we could do with TF-Lint, that there are a lot of like objective best practices that it can enforce, but not a lot of conventional best practices. And what I mean by that is like using positive Booleans, so you don't get this thing where you have double negatives, like not enabled true, right? And then to enable it, not enabled false, right? Where you have to do this double negative computation in your head when looking at these things. I hate that. So one of our best practices at Cloud Posse has always been to keep the flag something enabled for consistency. How to use lists and when to use them for feature flags and so forth. All of these best practices that we have at Cloud Posse are documented at docs.cloudposse.com. When you go to learn and you scroll down here on the left, we have the best practices section for Terraform. So here are our Terraform best practices. And I realized that a lot of these would be difficult to implement using just TF-Lint. Now TF-Lint supports plugins, so we could create our custom lint plugin, but then I realized doing a lot of these would be hard to do statically without some AI basically looking at the intent of what the feature is trying to do. So that brings me up to am I thinking about this right, or am I overlooking it, or is something wrong with our best practices? Or two, what are the other options? So then my mind went to CodeRabbit, which is a commercial solution, and then GitHub Copilot, which now supports some form of automated code review and code review rules, but I haven't looked into it. So that's where I'm going to leave off. Anybody have ideas here? Michael, did you get any further in your research?
I ended up just going down the rabbit hole, looking into writing TF-Lint plugins. I thought it was kind of interesting how it's implemented, very similar to kind of the provider ecosystem, but with TF-Lint. And so I was kind of just looking into what it would take to write some of those rules. But like you said, in the example was perfect, where you're talking about preferring one object over many related variables. That's a hard thing
You can't
to
do
write a
that.
rule for. Yeah. So I think a good amount of these you probably could write something in TF-Lint. You could add a rule set for that, but some of the other things, I think I agree, you'd probably need some kind of AI overlay to accomplish that logic.
Yeah.
I haven't looked into the Copilot rules that you mentioned. Our organization recently started using that, so I don't have that level of access to go and see what those settings look like. But that would be kind of interesting. I'd be curious to test that out on some of our repositories.
That's interesting. You guys have started using that. I believe you were using Codium or something before, right?
Yeah, so we actually kind of run them both in parallel, and then we we evaluate which one gives us more comprehensive answers for our code reviews. So we kind of run both of them in parallel, get 2 reviews on our PRs, and a lot of times they cover different gaps in it. So it's been pretty beneficial here and there.
So here's how I guess one can create a guidelines configuration for the code review thing. So yeah, just nerd sniping you in the event that something.
Yeah, if you drop that link, I'll test it out.
Yeah. So that would be basically what we'd want to rewrite or create a version of the best practices in this format. And then we could probably enforce something like that.
Another option that is out there is there's a framework called Crew AI, and you're essentially able to create different agents that have different roles and responsibilities. And so I looked at using Crew AI to start implementing best practices. And so we looked at saying variable names should be clear and concise. Everything should be tagged, or you should pass in all modules should have tags or should pass in tag or a context. And it was able to go through, and I was using Olama, which is probably on the lower end of quality. And so it was able to essentially find places where that wasn't happening. And as long as the prompting is super mechanical, you can usually get some good output. So I think what you're talking about is probably middle of the spectrum. So you may not get the full mileage of what you're looking for, but kind of building out a crew or a collection of agents to do that is another option.
29,000 stars. That's a pretty rapid rise to fame. How long has it been around? Last year, looks like.
I don't know. I know Apple started using it in some of their job postings in the last year. And I think that's kind of what has also continued its rise to fame.
Makes sense.
But I'm not in the AI space specifically, just kind of a hobbyist.
Is this like the equivalent of maybe a gross oversimplification? Is it almost like the Zapier of multi-agent AI?
Yeah, so there's kind of Llama Index, Agno, and Crew, and those are kind of the leading ones that I've seen. They have a lot of like tools or connections to kind of similar to Zapier, kind of like pull things in and just get them working basically. I don't have a good feel for like what if it's like quality or if it's just a bunch of like presentation or vanity possibility.
Interesting. Go straight to start enterprise trial. There's no in between.
Yeah, I was also turned off by that, but the open source docs are actually pretty good about helping you get started and not plugging you into their enterprise kind of offering. So it worked well with Olama and I think I was using on Llama 3.1. So it works out of the box locally. I don't know if it's like quality and worth building with, but it's an option.
Makes sense. Wow, that's a bold claim. Any other interesting ways of solving this or other questions we can discuss today? This is the part of the show where we talk to Michael Jenkins, who always has an interesting question for us. Michael, what's your question today?
Yeah, you know I'm not gonna let you get off with without asking a question if I happen to show up and actually be listening. I had stepped away for a second, so I'm glad I got back in time for QA. Not really questions per se, but I guess I can share some experiences recently. I've been working on a project with the serverless application model, or SAM CLI. And it's been pretty cool. I've done serverless stuff before, but I've always just kind of tapped into the AWS CLI or scripts or whatever the case is. But I've been using SAM CLI for a lot of stuff as far as like linting, building the package, deploying the package. And it's been pretty cool. I mean, it's CloudFormation based on the back end. So even if I do SAM deploys, I can still use AWS CLI to interact with the CloudFormation. And the one hurdle that it's really helped me with is whenever I tried to deploy functions to AWS Lambda that had dependencies. I always struggled to get the dependencies in the right place to kind of zip them up. And SAM does that naturally. I don't even know how it does it, to be honest. I just do SAM build, SAM deploy, and point it to the requirements file, or the requirements files next to the code, and it installs the dependencies where they're supposed to be, creates the zip, uploads it, and it works great. So I'm loving it. If for nothing else, just that feature alone has been
It's a
golden.
breath of fresh air trying to do that over using Terraform to deploy Lambdas, you're saying?
Yeah, well, yeah, and I've never leaned on Terraform to deploy Lambdas, but I'll use it as the stub. Like I'll deploy a just empty Python script that returns hello world or something, and then I'll use another pipeline to actually deploy code into that slot that Terraform has created. But yeah, I would never try to build. Well, I shouldn't say never. I have tried, and yeah, it's not fun deploying Lambdas with Terraform.
Yeah, I know there's a project trying to focus in on doing that, but I know it uses a lot of the local provider to make it happen.
Yeah.
What was I gonna say? Did you do use GitHub Actions with that, or did you do it with code build, code pipeline?
Well, right now it's all at the command line because it's really I'm just kind of getting started with it. I haven't rolled anything up into a automation tool yet. But honestly, I'm probably going to try a bunch of them just because I'm experimenting with it. I'll probably do GitHub Actions out of the gate because that's where my code is. Might try GitLab CI, Bitbucket. I'm a stalwart fan for Bitbucket and Bitbucket pipelines because it's a pretty cool service. Um, and from there, yeah, I might try Jenkins or something like that just to kind of get, experience to see how this particular approach runs in other, task runners.
Makes sense. I forgot that. You've talked a lot about the updates from Bitbucket.
Yeah. I still follow them, and they kind of get they're what, third in line behind GitHub and GitLab as far as like hosted CI, hosted CI in terms of repositories, because Circle CI is still out there for hosted CI. But yeah, I'm a fan of the Atlassian ecosystem. I mean, from Jira to Confluence to pipelines, so it all kind of fits together for me.
Hey, Cyrus, I see you raising your hand.
Everybody. This is just more of a general question I had on things. We were trying to get the we're still in the setup phase. We're trying to get the AWS SSO sync up to port our groups over from Google automatically.
Okay.
So we ran into basically a situation where a component has, through no fault of your guys' own, AWS has changed things behind the scenes, and the component has like essentially gone out of date. What are the general strategies towards like how is that handled by the community at this point? Do people just go in and push a PR out if they can find a solution for that, or what?
So yeah, for a while we were entertaining using SSO sync. I think we still have something deployed, but if it's not working right now, I'm not sure. It is everything community supported at that degree for unless there's a paid support. So the way we work with that is basically twofold. So one is if you want us to do it, we have these through that newly launched Cloud Posse support. You go to cloudposse.com/support, and flexible support would be the way you could have us do it. And then if that's not in the budget, then what you can also do is open a pull request, and then we'll accept that into the repository, assuming it passes tests and meets the standards and stuff.
And then if we're just gonna run with it locally for a little bit, I'm playing with the idea of just hacking and getting it working.
Yeah.
So we could just vendor the components and then modify that vendored code, and as long as we don't do another vendor pull, it won't overwrite it, or what's
exactly. Just remove it from the vendoring config or remove the vendor config altogether, and then that won't happen anymore.
So vendor it, leave the existing code, and then modify what we want. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
And that's kind of how we arrived at this solution, because I've given the story many times, but we've gone through a few generations, you could say, of the Cloud Posse reference architecture. where in the beginning we made it so dry, 100% of the code was like on our GitHub repositories. And that meant that in order to make any changes or experiment, you had to fork it, you had to update your sources, make the changes possibly in 2 places, and that really sucked. And then if you just wanted to test something locally, that was difficult. So then we went the polar opposite, which was just copy everything into the infrastructure repository, but then you had no way of easily updating it when the upstreams changed. But that allowed us various degrees of freedom so you could customize and make the changes locally. What ended up happening then is then we had, different components at different levels of maturity all over the place, and that was unmanageable. So then the vendoring was the perfect mix of both. It gives you the ability to pull in changes upstream so that, let's say, 80%, 90% of what you have comes from, a maintainable source. And for everything else where you need little tweaks here and there, you can always diverge, just remove it from the vendoring and then, vendor it, disable the vendoring for that component. And then you're on your way and you can customize that and change it. And if they're meaningful contributions, obviously the way this whole community works, the way this whole solution works is rising tide floats all boats. So if it improves it in some way materially, fixes some bug you encountered, we would appreciate PR, but you're not obligated to that under Apache 2.
Certainly. Yeah, and then do you have a general pattern that you would do for, like, if we vendor a component and then make it our own one way or another? How do you identify and separate it out as a non-vendored component in the future? Would you label it differently, or yeah?
Oh no, so I believe in the version of the reference architecture there's a file called component.yaml inside of that folder. That is what makes that vendored. You delete that file, it's no longer considered vendor.
Interesting. Let's see. Okay. So that's how you identify it, basically, is you would look at the component and be like, oh, this vendored aspect of it isn't there.
Component.yaml, that file, a file exactly named that, component.yaml.
I didn't know
I
if there
also
was
think
a tagging system where you rename the component to be something custom. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say you could definitely put it in like a subfolder, or you could rename it or whatever to make it easier for you. It's just like most of it's just file path operation, so it just has to be underneath whatever the component root is set to in your Atmos config, which is components basically by default. So as long as it's under there, you could have like a subfolder that was called like custom if you wanted, and then you could have it under like components custom, and then your customized version could be in there, or whatever the name of your organization is, you could have it like components Acme, and then like underneath there or whatever you wanted. And then when you refer to it in stack config, then you just have to say like metadata, and then the path is basically would be like components Acme foo, whatever the name of the component is, in that case. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, guys.
But yeah, then we are having the customer workshops 30 minutes after this office hour. So join us there, Cyrus, since that might be a good place to ask some technical questions. And just going to show an example here of like API gateway. This is that file component.yaml we're talking about. So that's the only thing. That's this here. It says where it came from. So the Cloud Posse component organization and this repository. And then, like, let's say you wanted to contribute something back to Cloud Posse in our components, you could go to that location, open a pull request against this component. And we have automated testing now on roughly, I don't know, 40% or something of all of our components now. So that accelerates our ability to test and validate that.
Yeah. Technically, the outside people are going to have to fork it and then open the pull request from their own fork. Yeah.
Click this little fork button here.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Cool. Let's see. Any other questions we can answer today? Well, if no more questions, I'm about tapped out. Don't have anything else to discuss. Okay. Well, that's it. Yeah, well, thanks then, everyone. If no other questions, we'll wrap up a little bit early today. Give you back some time. We will be hosting office hours again next week, same time, same place. So if you have not yet registered for office hours, you can do so by going to cloudposse.com/office hours here, like that, to register. And if you have not yet joined up for our Slack community, go to cloudposse.com/Slack and you can register. That's where a lot of us are hanging out by the water cooler, if you will. We'll be posting a recording of our office hours to the YouTube channel. That's at youtube.com/cloudposse. And if you're curious about working with Cloud Posse at your organization, go to cloudposse.com/meet. Again, cloudposse.com/meet. Thanks everyone for your time today. Talk to you later.